how do we teach these? Let me just expand on it further. How do we teach these in our language classrooms? Well, I have two slides for this. In one, which is the present one, I'll talk about teaching the macro structure, and in the next one, I'll talk about the microstructure. For macrostructure, this framework, which was published by Joyce and Slade in 1997, is somehow similar to the 7-stage cycle of speaking, which I have discussed extensively in 4 or 5 videos earlier. So I highly recommend that you watch those videos. My own personal evaluation is that this framework is like a more basic framework of teaching speaking. So personally, I would say the 7-stage cycle of speaking is more comprehensive and more updated. However, we can quickly go through this 4 stage of speaking, and if you think that it may be a better fit for your classrooms, you can actually use these to teach conversations and other spoken genres in your language classrooms. In the first stage, we need to build the field, followed by model the text, followed by engaging students in joint constructions, and then engaging them in independent construction. By building the field, just as a summary, I would say you want to build 2 things. One is language knowledge, and 2 is their knowledge of task, persons, and strategies, which I have extensively talked about in other videos. And by language, I mean to build vocabulary and grammatical structures for students. Now you can pause the video and read these statements. They provide more elaborations. In the second stage, where we model the text, we actually want and require students to use the knowledge that they got from this stage to explain the stages of the genre, to unpack what they hear. For example, we play a conversation between 2 people, and we want them to use the knowledge of task and persons to talk about what they understood and how they unpack the underlying structure of what they hear. So from knowledge to some practice here. We also want to engage them in producing some of the chunks, in practicing some of the idiomatic expressions that they have learned at this stage. And then we engage them in production. So it's pretty much like we're moving from some sort of accuracy in knowledge building to fluency. Whereas in the previous stage, in the previous framework that I discussed in the 7-stage cycle of speaking, we moved from fluency to accuracy. So that's one of the differences between Joyce and Slade and Go and Burns frameworks. Now, in joint construction, they record the story by telling it. For example, they recount an anecdote, they tell an anecdote, and they audio tape it, and then they analyze it. They analyze it with their peers or with a group of partners with whom they have been working. And that's what we call a joint construction. Then they talk about the problems, the issues that they identified, and so on and so forth. And finally, they do an independent construction where they set up role plays, where we set up role plays where students adopt different roles, for example, a storyteller or the listener in the development of a conversation, and they keep practicing this. And following this, we also need to provide feedback. But in this framework, we don't have that. That's why I stress that the 7-stage cycle perhaps has an advantage over this 4-stage cycle. There is one more thing before I move on. Is under the joint construction, we have the last bullet point. We have provide activities in which students provide micro aspects of conversation. And actually, that's a topic for my next slide. What do you mean by micro aspects of conversation? I have already talked about these in some details in previous video. What I mean here is to teach the micro features of casual conversations, such as adjacency pairs, turn taking, some of which include some of those adjacency pairs, which include questions, responses, offers, grants and acceptance, etc. in addition to that, interactional strategies and formulaic expressions, and so on. Some research shows that there are a group of difficulties, several difficulties for language learning students. 6 of them are here. The first one is formulaic expressions. We can identify the formulaic expressions that students have difficulty learning, followed by the strategies and the language that is used in that language to end conversations, followed by strategies to give feedback, then mistiming, turn taking, which is a common mistake or common problem, if not a mistake, that we can observe in conversations between L1 users and L2 or L3 users. Following the shifts in topics, for example, the L2 learner or the L3 learner cannot identify the shifts in the topic. When that's, for example, when a speaker or interlocutor moves on from one topic to another, the listener doesn't understand that the topic has changed, and now the speaker is now talking about something else. And finally, the strategy is to ask questions. This is another area of lack, which we might want to stress in our language learning classes. We need to analyze students' problems, and based on the results of our analysis, which should be continuous and ongoing, we should modify our teaching practices and provide students with insights to their own errors so that they will learn and they will try to make an attempt to solve those problems and mistakes. And finally, we need to provide more guided practices, something that we have been calling differentiated learning in Singapore. That's, we provide individual feedback, individual specific feedback, which is crafted and devised specifically for one or a group of students with some errors. So giving some very general feedback may not be very useful. It may still be useful, but may not be very useful as, let's say, differentiated feedback, which is specific for particular students. Now this brings me to the end of this video, and in the next episode, which is going to be the last installment, I'll talk about corpus linguistics and spoken discourse and how we can use that. It's going to be a kind of perhaps a brief video on how to use it for teaching, really, not research. Thank you very much for your attention. Please stay tuned in. I'll get back soon. Have a good day.